Okay, in this video, I'm going to talk about my thoughts on the philosophy of conversation and what you can do to be a more likable person. So, when I was a kid, I didn't understand how human interactions worked. So, I spent a lot of time studying them. And then, recently, when I was at a party, I met somebody and I was talking about all the things I wanted to do in my life and all the things I wanted to teach people. And this was a topic that piqued her interest. I saw her eyes light up when I discussed how to get someone to like you. So I'm making a video about it. Um, it's a summary of everything I've learned since I started thinking about it as a kid, from when I was just like a wee toddler, and then through school and like being the class clown and pushing all the buttons and figuring out how people worked, and then just thinking about it like almost in my own mind, constantly processing it, and then feeling like I've learned more and more and more and more about it. And now I'm at the point where I feel like what I know about it is what other people know about it, and I'm going to try and condense it all into this video. So if you're curious about how conversation unfolds or how to interact with people and you want to know more about it, like, I hope that this video helps. So the first step is to think about what it is when you're interacting with somebody. And there's two things that are like really important to like have at the beginning before you move on to the whole of the interaction. So the first is to understand why the conversation is happening. And there are many different social contexts where conversations happen. And sometimes those contexts have purposes that are already attached to them. And it's in the best interest of a successful interaction with somebody that the purpose is followed, because then it's directed and everybody understands what's going on. And that's going to make it a lot easier for people to like each other in this interaction, is when it's moving together. Other times when they're like purely social interactions, it's less obvious. So like on one hand, like you could have a business deal or you could have like a work meeting and it's very clear why you guys have all met up and talked to each other. And other times you're in a social interaction and you don't understand why you're talking to each other. But you do. Like, it's just you haven't thought about it yet. So the primary reason that we talk with each other is for emotional well-being, to get to know each other, to learn something about the other person. Other times we're thinking about getting something that we want, or any number of of reasons. Maybe you're, well, performing, or not performing, but like engaging in a common activity together, which is still to like engage in a common activity together, and thereby having a purpose for your meeting. But knowing the reason that you guys, that you and the other person that you're talking to, or even if it's in a group, having that purpose in mind when you're interacting is going to guide the interaction for simplicity. No, it's just gonna like it's gonna make it more engaging, because if like everybody's off topic all the time, then the flow will be very convoluted. It would be like a bumpy road as to a smooth road. So it won't go very far very fast. It'll just be distracted all the time. Which brings me to the second point, which is that there is a limit to our conversational ability. And I think this is really striking because well, I'll explain it. Basically, what I imagine is like, in my own head, I have perceived all that I've perceived. And that world, even though it's the same as the next person's world, we're all living on the same planet and we all see the same things and we all create ideas of what exists in the world. What we call each thing is a word, and that word is going to be different because our ideas are also different. And sometimes they're very similar, but oftentimes, especially as the ideas become more abstract, what I refer to by one word will be something different to somebody else using the exact same word. I mean, if you want to talk about what God is a very difficult concept, but maybe if we just understood exactly what the scope of it was, and I kind of think that's impossible. Whereas, like, you could also talk about a chair, and then, you could even get the semantics of a chair. Does, like, the chair have a back, or does it have an armrest, or, is it still a chair if there's no back and no armrest? Well, maybe it's just a stool. So when you're talking with somebody, it's really important that you understand that your words have a different meaning than their words until you communicate about it. And once you communicate about it and you build an understanding, then you're going to relieve a lot of speed bumps or like hindrances to the conversation, because you'll be able to communicate about ideas that are a lot more aligned than they are when they're different. Because if you have a vagary, then there's going to be a miscommunication, and then you'll have to go through this step or have an argument. I don't know, either in resolution or not. So then the next thing about conversation that I think is really important is to understand where the energy is flowing. And this is because each person has an internal monologue or internal self-perception, and then there's the external world outside of the self. And the conversation is going to occur between two selves. Now, the direction of energy between two selves, or even one self and many selves, is a perceivable thing. You can be giving more of yourself to somebody else, and thereby, raising the quality of the conversation up. Or you could also be taking more for yourself and taking it from somebody else, and that would be lowering the net quantity of energy in this conversation. And for me, ideally, what we would have is like, I would prefer when I talk to people is to have two selves that are both raising up each other and building something with a surplus of energy, as opposed to like two selves that are both pulling from the other one and creating what generally looks like an argument or an attachment trap, or someone feeling really bad and the other person also feeling bad, and cycling downward. So in the conversation, it's really it's better. I mean, it's not necessarily the case, but it's better for you to work on yourself and be an energy positive self. And that means giving your energy and getting out of yourself and giving it to somebody else, because that's going to it's going to set the example, and it's going to carry the conversation and the interaction even if the other person is negative. So what that looks like is, it looks like complimenting them. It looks like listening to them and hearing what they have to say, and then understanding that the ideas that they're talking about, and in understanding, showing them that like they are being understood, because people enjoy that, and people enjoy feeling validated. So when you validate them for their feelings, and when you show them respect for their boundaries, and when you give them consideration, this is all like positive things that will encourage a healthy interaction between you and somebody else. And I think this is a really important point, because I was not aware of this for at least 20 years of my life until I read some interesting books. And I think maybe more people are more aware of it now, but I think it's really important that if you aren't quite aware of like how energy moves in a conversation, that you think about it, and you think about what it is that you're taking for yourself because you have a need for something, right? And these are basically low self-esteems or like insecurities. And like, it's okay if you have low self-esteem and insecurity, and it's okay to like have needs that are built out of low self-esteem and insecurity, But it's also important to recognize that low self-esteem and insecurity is going to um, require more energy, right, than it is if you are feeling confident and with high self-esteem. Because when you're confident and with high self-esteem, it means that you can like leave yourself behind and then give to others. Whereas when you are like insecure and with low self-esteem, then your personal thoughts are all, they're governed by your like own internal judgment ahead of, right, like if we go back to the ideas, right, like suddenly your whole worldview is skewed by negativity, and that's going to detract from the conversation. So there's different ways that the inward self is going to take energy from the interaction between people or other person. I like talking to just one people at a time or one person at a time. Some people are group talkers, and I have less experience in this field. But when yourself is double thinking, not double thinking, that's a different word, but like second, when you think about it twice, is like, is there's what you want to do, and then you're hindered by your own thoughts of ahead, like it's your own filtration. So if you're like judging yourself or doubting yourself, or you have like a strong internal monologue that like zonks you, and then you can't even behave because your internal monologue is running. If you're putting up a wall, or if you're not feeling vulnerable with somebody, these are all like defensive mechanisms for a self that is not willing to engage with somebody else. It's got all of this hindrance in the way, which makes the conversation really hard. But it could be worse. There are definitely things that you can do as yourself and that other people do, and it's important to recognize what other people can do with their behaviors, right? So sometimes you'll have a conversation with somebody and you'll feel lower as a result. And that's what I'm talking about, is like someone else is taking your energy and validating themselves with it against your will. And it looks like different things. It could be, very clearly is like the bully, right? The bully is the one who aggressively threatens you or makes you feel bad about yourself with verbal assault, right? Both of those are acts of bullying, and they make you feel worse because you feel threatened, like your selfhood feels threatened and weak to them, right? And then they feel better about themselves because they feel strong in the moment, but it's empty, right? But it also happens different ways. You could be, what's the word here? Validation seeking by like feeling poorly about yourself. So like the woe is me, right? Can you please feel sympathy for me because my situation is so awful, and I want you to feel like sorry for me about my poor situation. Is someone else asking you to validate them because they feel poorly about their situation, when in reality each situation is never like objectively good or bad in a very clear way. And what it is like things happen and they're challenging, but they're not things that like feeling bad about them is going to change, right? Only doing something to solve the problem, which would be a good thing to solve a bad situation. That's what there is to do about it. And asking others to validate you for it is an act of taking energy from them. Sometimes it's gonna look like somebody who's like asking you questions and not respecting your selfhood boundaries, right? So like if you have someone who is closed off, right? Like they're not interested in engaging in the conversation, but someone else is like asking to like pull them inside, like outside of their comfort zone. That's also an act of like interrogation, right? It's taking energy from them by making them feel uncomfortable so that you can have the power of knowing things about them. So when you have a conversation, it's really important that you understand what it is that's going on between each personhood, and each person is on their own path, their own way in life, right? Like maybe they haven't learned how to have a conversation yet. Maybe they're still struggling with whatever is plaguing them in the moment. And like it's okay if you're in that spot in life. You know, it's also better if you can understand what's going on so that you can improve it when you're in a poor spot. And ideally, you'd be in a better spot so that you can have better conversations with people. Like for example, me, like when I have a conversation with somebody, I'm really interested in having, an intellectual discussion. I'm really interested in having abstract ideas and learning more about all manner of truth. I like to learn about people, and these are my purposes in a conversation. Which takes me to like the last point, which is that the most attractive thing you can do in a conversation is to be outward as opposed to inward. Like, is to be positive and giving to that person as opposed to like taking, which I think is like the whole point. And that means knowing who you are so that when yourself is expressed in the conversation, you're confident about it. Without it, like, you won't be able to express yourself. And that is probably the most attractive trait that there is having confidence. And that confidence will guide you because you know the purpose and you know the limits of conversation. And when you know how to carry a conversation because you know where it needs to go and you understand what the differences are between your communication styles and able to give enough of yourself to carry the difference, right? So when you understand how somebody else is, then you can meet them where they are as opposed to like taking them. And that's going to make people feel good. It's going to make you look good because you're giving to them, and everybody, generally speaking, enjoys the presence of somebody else who's giving, who's generous with their compliments and generous with their consideration and generous with their politeness. And when you know yourself, you're able to do that. And then there's another point here, which is it's to be vulnerable. So that means like not having those barriers for self-expression. And they all go hand in hand. So like being yourself, being vulnerable, being open is knowing who you are and being able to express yourself and go on the path that you need to go to. That's what's attractive. So when you talk with somebody, you'll be able to carry the conversation. You'll be able to give them everything that will make them feel good about themselves so that they open up. And then they're going to like you. So that's really what conversations come down to, is being able to understand. And I'm sure there's lots of concepts in this video where like you might already understand parts of it and they kind of make sense. So I'm just trying to piece it all together, especially for somebody who hasn't really thought about it before. So that's what it is having a purpose, knowing the limit of the conversation, and then carrying the difference of that limit so that like you have actual clarity in communication where your ideas match. And then understanding the direction of energy in your interaction. So when you understand the direction, then you can be giving in that direction. And the way that you're giving in that direction is to be confident in yourself and curious about them. And it will make you a very likable person. So I hope you found this video helpful. Thank you.